All right, let's go ahead and get class kicked off here. I did get a couple of 30-second feedback form submissions on yesterday's class. I'm glad that you guys benefited from the impromptu session, and wanted to just encourage you guys to throw those questions out at the beginning of really any class, right? Because th those are life experiences for me that I'm happy to share that I don't even know to share, right? So if you guys are ever curious about something, whether it is something that you're struggling with going through the curriculum, whether it's something that you're dealing with, something for the first time technically that you need a little bit more help with, something that you'd love to know if other people are feeling the same way, always feel free to Slack me a question, post it in the Zoom chat, just come off mute when we do our general how are we feeling, questions at the beginning of class. I'm always happy to jump on things like that. And oftentimes I think that that is often more beneficial than, actually just sitting down and coding for 2.5 hours straight, right? So feel free to always throw questions out like that in the future. Um, Joe asked a unrelated question to last night's rant about when is the next capstone check-in. And so I wanted to take a quick second to touch on that. All of the answers to that are in the CICC 6 channel as well. But the next capstone check-in is scheduled for 8/8. So that is what, 2.5 weeks away, almost 3 weeks away. So what are the goals for the next capstone check-in? The goal is to have a majority of your front end rebuilt in React, right? That may not feel something that you can do right now, and that's okay. We still have another week of React left, and then I believe there's an entire week in the schedule that gives you guys a little bit more time to get your React project set up, start moving some components over, all of that kind of stuff. So, what are the three goals for the 8/8 capstone check-in? The majority of your front end should be moved over to React. This is not an abandoned ship on your HTML. This is, hey, let me move section by section over here, make sure that it's showing up well. I do not encourage you to try and move all your code over at once and then try and fix it all at once. Instead, I recommend make a component, move that component over, make sure the component's showing up okay. Now set up your next component, move that over, change the class to the class name, adjust any CSS as needs that you need to. And we're going to see CSS tonight, how we apply that, all of that kind of stuff. Majority of the front end should be moved over from React. You should have some data in state that will eventually be stored in the database, right? So when we do our use state and we get the name of the variable and the set name variable, we have our use state, and then in the parentheses are our arguments for what is the first default value of state. That's where we want to be throwing in some data. And so think about structuring that data. Does it need to be in an array? Is it an object? What kind of data, what end user inputted information is going to eventually be stored in the database? That's what we want to be putting into state. So we're going to see state tonight, not only on the form input, that we're going to build a chat application tonight, and then we'll pick it back up on Monday. So we're gonna see the form input tonight, and how does user type in a message, how do they send it? But then in reality, those messages would all be saved in a database, right? Whether you sent the message, whether you received the message, when was the message sent, what was the content of the message, all of that good stuff. We're going to see that in state tonight. So for your capstones, you want to be thinking along those same lines, right? What will eventually be saved in the database? That's what we want to store in state, and that is what you guys want to start building around on your capstone. And then finally, the third thing, and probably the most beneficial part of React before we really dive into the database and API calls and all of that good stuff, is you should have some reusable components, right? Whether that is, hey, I'm keeping track of plants in my capstone and 3 plants show up, So I'm going to build one component called plant that is going to take a couple different props and show that information, whether that is a to-do list item, where the to-do list item is going to have a checkbox, whether it's done, the name of the to-do item, and maybe a due date associated with it. Whatever it is, when you think about your capstones, you're going to be thinking about, hey, there's this one component that I'm going to reuse multiple times, right? And almost everyone's capstone should have some reusable component inside of it. So that's what we're shooting for. If you are panicked about that, give React another week, right? We've got to do the chat project and we've got to do the blog project. We haven't scratched the surface yet on multi-page React apps yet either. So chat will be the last single page app that we do in React. And then next week, we will dive into the blog project where we will set up something called a router. And a router is how we can navigate from one page to another page. So still more to learn in React. I understand that, but wanted to set out those capstone expectations for you guys. And again, let me just confirm that in the schedule. Um, So schedule wise, we are here. We have another entire week of React. We do have this project week scheduled. I may move this around a little bit. But this is kind of an open week where we don't have any project scheduled. This is a chance for you guys to just throw concepts out or throw things that you're struggling with at the moment, or screen share through your capstone and say, I'm struggling on this section of it. Can you help me there? But the capstone check-in isn't until the end of that week. So before we dive into the database, before we dive into the full stack nature of it, that's where we're at. So again, we have the chat app. We're going to make that a part one tonight. We'll have the chat part two. We will have the blog project, which will take all 3 days to finish out React. Then we have our project review week. And then at the very end of that week, again on 8/8 on Thursday, we'll have our capstone check-in. So a little bit more time, 2 full weeks and a day before our next check-in. With all of that said, does anyone have any questions? Okie doke. How are we feeling about the React in general? Now that we've done the weather app, we've played around with APIs a little bit more. Hopefully, we're starting to see kind of how everything cumulatively builds on each other. We're still using HTML that we started in week 2, right, to structure all these pages out to get the content on there. We are starting to see obviously CSS and Bootstrap still being used. We are still using JavaScript, but React has kind of unlocked a new world for us, allowing us to intermix the JavaScript and the HTML. Of course, we are bringing in everything that we learned from Ryan of, oh, it turns out that New York Times is not the only one who has an API. We also have all of that data available in the weather API that we're pulling all of that information in from. We're starting to see in React how we don't need to interact with the document object model directly, but instead we do have some new complexities introduced, like state and use effect, understanding how those things are rendering out, all of that kind of stuff. I did just see something in the chat. The next capstone check-in, responding to a question, I put the answer to that in the CIC C6 Slack. Basically, you need the majority of your front end moved over into React. It doesn't need to be fully moved over, but starting to get some of the stuff over there. Some of the data that will eventually be coming from your API and your database needs to be stored in state. And finally, reusable components. You should have at least one component that is reused, so that we can start making our code DRY, don't repeat yourself, so we can dry out our code, basically. Okay. Any questions about React in general, where we're at, kind of seeing how this is building together? Any questions on concepts related to React? Any concepts not related to React that you still have questions on? Any questions on assignments that you may be past due on that you need a little guidance of how to jumpstart? Anything related? Any questions at all? And of course, you can schedule one-on-ones if you have questions, or shoot me a question in Zoom if you don't want to come off mute as well. Okay. One final thing before we dive into code. I will not be in class tomorrow, but that does not mean that you guys are fortunate enough to be off. Nathan will be coming in, and we did a little bit of a pivot. Nathan will be coming in and teaching you guys all about testing. So he's going to show you guys, I believe, Jest, and how we can write something called unit tests as our projects are growing, right? You guys are seeing that these projects don't get any smaller. We continue to add more and more lines of code to each one of these projects. Well, when that happens, you reach a point where you add a new feature and can actually break another part of your code without even realizing that you had done it. So Nathan is going to talk about all the different kinds of testing that we have, starting at the smallest kind of testing, which is called unit testing, which is, hey, I wrote this function, it's supposed to do X, Y, and Z. When I go add a new feature somewhere else, go test to make sure X, Y, and Z are still working. All the way through to the largest kind of testing, which we call end-to-end testing or integration testing. They're kind of related, where basically we can write tests to say, hey, based off of this user interface, the user should be able to click into this input. They should be able to sign into the page. Once they sign in, they should be able to get to this page. They should be able to type in a message, hit the enter button, and see the message show up. Another user should be able to send a message, and the other user should be able to receive it. All of that kind of stuff, right? So Nathan will be coming back. We'll be covering all of that kind of stuff. And then we still will have Ryan come in and do the TypeScript class. I'm not kicking the can totally down the road on that. Some scheduling logistic stuff. So Ryan will be coming in to do TypeScript, but we have Nathan coming in tomorrow night, normal 5:30 to 8:30 time slot, and he will be doing all of a whole class on testing. Okay, with all of that said, we are going to fire up yet another React app. This time we're doing it from scratch. So I am going to pop open my terminal. I am going to spare you guys all of the logistics of CDing around, and we're just going to take the shortcut of doing it right in Finder. So I'm going to pop open my C6 My Code. I'm going to go to my terminal and type in CD space. I'm going to grab my week 14 folder and drop that entire folder right in terminal. That will drop the entire folder path in for me. And remember, when we do our create React app command, it makes a new folder for us. So that's why we're not making a new folder. Create React app does that for us. So I'm going to do an npx, x for execute, create React app. And I am going to call this day 3 dash chat. Going to let that cook a little bit. While that is running in the background, I am going to pop open my week 14. I am going to grab my day 3 chat, and I'm going to throw it in VS Code. It's still running and installing in the background. That is totally fine. While it's running in the background, there is a live share link in the Zoom chat. It is apparently taking its sweet time to install React. There we go. Gonna check the terminal. Still is not completely done. Okay. When the terminal is finished running, when you see happy hacking, that means your React is good to go. You can go ahead and quit out of the terminal. I am going to, in VS Code, open an integrated terminal and run my command npm start. Remember, we don't need to run npm install because we didn't delete the node modules folder when we copied this project over. If you ever did get an error like cannot find command React scripts, that can be fixed with an npm install. In general, rerunning npm install will not cause any double issues. Should have a spinning React logo at this point. Give you guys a second to have your React install, and remember, open an integrated terminal, npm start or npm run start. They both do the exact same thing to fire up your React server. After we get our React up and running, we're going to head to our app.js. We are, of course, going to take out the stupid header that they put in every single time. So we can clear that out. We can also get rid of this import logo because we don't need the React logo hanging out in our project. I'm going to head to my app.css, clear that out entirely, still leave the file. And then the last thing that I'm going to do is this is a project that we do need Bootstrap for. So I am going to head over to getbootstrap.com. I'm going to go into the docs. I'm going to go down to the link tag number 2 and go ahead and grab that. Of course, you can grab it out of my live share if you would like, instead of pulling up the link directly. I'm going to head to my public index.html, and I'm going to drop in my Bootstrap link right at the end of my head tag. And then I will rename my React app to chat app in the title tag. The result of that should be a white screen in your browser, and we should be now good to go in React. Should see chat app up in the title and a white screen here. Does anyone need a setup step repeated or help or not have a white screen with the chat app showing in their browser or an error message anywhere? Okay. So let's talk about a chat application, because whenever we dive into a new project, right, always a good idea to plan things out before we start executing on them, especially because this is going to be a 2-day project, right? We've got a lot that we can interact with here. Again, we're going to do this today. Nathan is in tomorrow, and then I will pick things back up on Monday with the rest of this chat application. So a chat application to me has 2 major screens. We're going to kind of chicken out and only do the second one. But when we think about a chat application, we think about it as kind of the inbox, right? Of, hey, here's everyone that I'm messaging. Here's the last message that got posted, whether you're on iOS, whether you're on Android, whether you're using Facebook Messenger, whether you're in WhatsApp, doesn't matter what one you're using, right? They're kind of 2 really main screens. The first one is, hey, this is the list of all of your contacts or messages that you've sent. And then we click into one of them and we get the list of all of the messages, right? We're going to skip the first part for now. We're going to say, all right, we don't care about the inbox. We're just going to make a page with a thread of messages. So if we break that down a little bit more, what would we normally have on that page with all the messages? Well, we probably have a header right at the top of it, right? All right, here's who I'm messaging back and forth. We probably have some messages that I have sent. We probably have some messages they have sent. And then we probably need something down at the bottom that has a input that allows them to send a message. Everyone agree? Anyone want to add to that planning before we go in and set all of that up? Okay. So, a couple different ways we can do this. Some people like to go code as they go. They like to say, hey, I'm going to do the header. I'm going to get my header all set up. And once my header is done, I'm going to move on to the next file and code all of that out. Some people like to lay out all of their components first, and then they like to go rapid fire through all of them. We're going to try the first option. I'm sorry, the second option tonight. We're going to create all of our files. We're going to create all of our components. And then we are going to add the content to all of them. So this is where you're going to say, Dear God, Max, you're going too quick. We're doing the same step over and over and over again, right? So I'm going to go through the first one slow, and then we will do just rapid fire through the rest. So I'm going to head over to my files. App.js is kind of the special one, right? We know that is the top level. That is where everything's showing up. We're going to create a new file, and again, make sure everything is in the source folder. If you create any of these files outside of the source folder, React isn't going to be able to find them. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to do a new file in my SRC, and I'm going to call it header.js. Now, whenever we make a new React component, we are going to say const header is going to take some empty parameter list. Those are the empty parentheses. And in order for it to be a valid React component, two things need to be true. The name of the component has to be capitalized, or of the first letter has to be a capital. And second, the function must return an HTML element. So here, I'm just going to return a div. Then we are going to export our default header. Prettier runs and gets rid of the spaces between the div. That's okay. But we are going to do this for a couple different components. And I'm going to put that list in the chat. We're going to do it for the header. We're going to do one for message input. We're going to do another for messages list. We're going to do an incoming message and an outgoing message. And that's everything. So I'm going to rapid fire through the rest of those, and then I will set up a poll, make sure you guys are good to go. So I'm just going to go in the order I did it there. Again, please, please, please make sure your capitalization, too many syllables there, is on point, and that everything that you're creating is in the SRC folder. So I'm going to go new file, message input.js, const message input equals a function that returns a div, export default message input. New file, messages list, const messages list is equal to something that returns a div, export default messages list. You can close these files too after you create them. Then we go to our incoming message. And do an outgoing message. And I do my message input. Yes, I did my message input, so we are good to go. I'm going to start a poll just to make sure you guys are all caught up on that. But when you are done getting all those files set up, and we will dive into each one of them. All right, anyone need another minute? Anyone stuck anywhere? Anyone have errors? Good to go? Okay. And that poll, thank you guys for the feedback. All right, start at the beginning and work our way down. I am a big believer that that is often the best way to dive into any project. So we do have our file called header already created, but no matter what I put in here, it's not going to show up, right? So if I put an H1 in here and say, I don't know, messages with mom, I come over here, my H1 doesn't show anywhere. Well, just making these files is not enough. I need to then use this component somewhere. So I'm going to head to my app.js and I'm going to drop in my header. Now, this is where autocomplete really starts to become your friend in VS Code. If I hit enter on this, you notice it will drop in that import for me. That's exactly what I want it to do. If you don't use that autocomplete and put your header in, it will give you an error like header is not defined. That's not what we want, right? So we do want to make sure that import is in there. Just like we exported it from the header file, we need to import it over in this file. So I throw my header in, and now I get my lovely messages with mom. Okay, but that's right up at the top of the page. And so now I need to be careful about how I apply my Bootstrap classes. I don't want to necessarily put just my header in a container. I would like my whole to be in a container, right? So I'm gonna in my app.js, in my class name, I can go ahead and take out my class name app, and instead I'm gonna throw in a container. And just like that, I have now put in my messages with mom. But if I'm thinking about any chat app, right? iOS, Android, whatever it is, whoever you're talking with is usually in the center of the screen, right? So all I need to do, head back over to my header, and on my div here, I'm going to throw a class name. Remember in React, instead of class, it's class name. They accomplish the exact same thing. I'm going to add a text center. Where's my text center coming from? Where's my container coming from? That's all coming from my bootstrap that I put in the public index.html. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Maybe I'll add one more style piece. Maybe I will add a little bit of a border. So let's head over to, actually, we're going to do it a slightly different way. We could put everything in app.css. But with React, because we're breaking these out into separate files, it often makes sense to have multiple CSS files as well. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it header.css. And then I am going to say, hey, in my header.js, I need to do two things. I'm going to modify this div so it uses what we call a semantic HTML tag, right? We're going to call it the header tag instead. This not only makes our HTML easier to read, it also makes it easier for screen readers and other accessibility tools to know what kind of content is inside that div of the website. So I'm going to call it header. In my header.css, I'm going to target the header, and I will say, hey, let's throw a border on the bottom of 1px. We'll make it solid, and I happen to know the hex code CCC is a nice light gray. I'll also add some margin on the top of it of 15 pixels. Now, normally, when we make a CSS file, we'd have to go into our index.html. We'd have to add the link rel style sheet. We'd have to process through all of that. React has an easier way of doing it. Because React is blurring the lines between our HTML and our JavaScript, what we can do is in our header.js, come up here and import header.css. So we can import more than just JavaScript files. And down the road, we're actually going to learn how we can import images as well. But now we can import the header.css. Now, why didn't we need to say import styles from header.css? well, there's no thing that's really coming out of the CSS. We just want the CSS to get applied, right? So when we do that import here, what we should see over in our browser is not only the margin on the top, but also that border showing up on the bottom. So it is very common to see an app.css where those styles get applied to every single page. But as we start building out more and more components, it is also common to see a separate CSS file for each one of our components. Does anyone not have their border? Terry, what's up? Check your import, check to make sure that you've created your header.css, make sure your CSS is valid, and also make sure you've updated your tag here from a div to a header. And if all of that looks right to you, let me know and you can share your screen. Good, Terry, or you need help?
Yeah, I might need some help.
Go for it.
Thanks.
Header. Okay, so the only thing you're missing. Oh, a different error than what I thought you were going to have. Let me request remote. Okay, so be careful on your inputs here. This file name needs to match. So capital H, so capital H here. And then we normally need the .js at the end. That fixes that problem. And then in here, we ended up importing your header.css. And then, of course, we need to make that as well. So now if we just cheat and use the CSS I have already put in, go ahead, check that in your browser and see if that fixes it. Oh, go ahead and delete out this entire file. This is going to impact things that you don't want. Okay, try it now.
I don't really see.
Header. You should see messages with whoever, and it should be centered and a border line at the bottom of it.
Yeah, I don't see messages with brother. I see yours though. Message.
Oh, am I? Yeah, that was me. Refresh and see if it fixes it.
There we go. Yep.
Sorry, sometimes I hijack your ports without you guys even knowing when you join the live share. So please remind me of that and I will fix that.
Thanks, Max.
Of course. Anyone else need help? Okay. Dive back in. Okay. So believe it or not, that's all we need for our header, right? It's pretty basic, just a little bit of styling. We got our page going. We've got a border up there. So now I'm like, all right, what's next? We probably need an outgoing message. We need an incoming message. And we probably need our input to show up down at the bottom. right? So hopefully this is just a little bit of an HTML review for you, but we're getting to see it in different components, right? We're starting to see really an app take shape more than just a website. So why didn't I just do all of my incoming messages and outgoing messages directly in my app.js? Well, I kind of want to keep this as clean as possible, right? When I'm thinking about a chat app, I want to go, all right, there's a header, there's the list of all the messages, and there is the input down at the bottom. I don't want to necessarily have to put all of my messages in my app and clutter things up. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to target my messages list. And you will see that did not auto import for some reason. And that happens sometimes. I've been using VS Code for I don't know, 5 years now, and I still can't figure out sometimes why auto imports don't happen. So you will see there is an error down here. Messages list is not defined. Again, if yours auto imported, that's fine. You can leave it. If it didn't auto import, we need to do it manually up at the top. We're going to say import messages list from messages list. All of a sudden, it's going to wake up and remember where messages list is. That doesn't change our screen at all, though. Why not? Because we didn't put anything in messages list yet. So I'm going to switch over to my messages list, and we got to do a little work here. So I'm going to come in here, and in my messages list, I am going to put two different components here, and then we can practice building those out. I'm going to put in a sent message or an incoming message. And my auto import is now working again. So we'll say yes to that. Um, I believe you need to use the autocomplete to use the auto import, Joe, but there are times that I'm trying to use the autocomplete and it just does not want to give me that. And then I go to use the import and it auto completes the import. And I'm like, well, if you can find it in the autocomplete, why couldn't you find it in the component? Whatever. It's weird sometimes. So just keep it in the back of your mind that you may need to set it up manually. So I'm going to do my incoming message, and then I'm also going to do an outgoing message just so I have both of those set up. Now I need to set up those messages, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my incoming message first because that is what we have set up. And my incoming message, I'm going to use the grid system, right? Because if we think about a chat application, there's always a little gap between the message going out. I'm sorry, a little breathing space, a gap between that and the message itself. So I'm going to start with a class name of row. And this is an incoming message, so it should be all the way to the left side of the screen, right? And then there's a little bit of white area so that we know it's actually an incoming message. So I'm going to say, I'm going to do a div class name col10. And then I am going to actually put in my message text. So I'm going to throw a class name on this of message text and another one of a incoming message. And I'm going to say this is an example incoming message. Your call 10, Joe, what font is showing up? Does it look like it's in Bootstrap font or does it look like it's in a different font?
Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, I just meant the autocomplete where you do the like dot col dash 10 or dash whatever dot row wasn't. Is it does it not work in React or is it me?
You're thinking of Emmet. There we go. My brain got there eventually. I believe you have to enable Emmet support in React. That would be something though that you would have to Google and look into. But Emmet
maybe I
is
didn't
the
see.
name of the shortcut. The dot row enter and have it drop in the div automatically. I think you have to re-enable that.
All right.
Okay. Obviously, this looks nothing like an incoming message that we would think about, right? But I need to be careful about where I'm going to do my CSS here because I would like this message text to be able to apply both to my incoming message and my outgoing messages as well. So what I'm going to do is instead of creating a CSS file specifically for my incoming messages, I'm just going to create a file for my messages list.css. And we need to be careful here because CSS is not actually scoped the way that we think it would be. What does that mean? Well, I can come over back to my messages list.js. I'm going to go ahead and import my messages list.css. And you would think that this messages list CSS is only going to apply to anything in this component or beneath it. You would think. But in my messages list.css, I can actually come down here, target my header, and make it a color of red. And it turns red. Why does that matter? Because sometimes we just think just because we're importing it at this component, it will only affect this component. That's not the case. It's really easy to accidentally have CSS get applied to a page or a component that you didn't think it was going to get applied to. This is really an important thing when you're moving over an existing HTML project and it has custom CSS for every page. So what we need to do is scope our CSS to say we only want this CSS to apply to the messages list and anything underneath it. So here's how we do that. We're going to add an ID called messages list right here. Then anything that we do in our CSS, we are going to wrap in our messages list. This will prevent anything, unless the ID all the way up here at the top is messages list, it will not apply to anything else on the site. So even though React makes all CSS global, we can scope it down by just nesting in all of what we are targeting in our CSS. Does that make sense to everyone? We'll see that again in the blog project as well, but we'll get in the habit of making sure that we've got a wrapper selector on our CSS to make it only apply to what we want it to. Okay, let's do some CSS to make our messages look pretty. So I am going to say, hey, inside my messages list, we have some message text. And inside my message text, which is, again, the class that I'm targeting right now, I am going to say the color, the background color should be light gray. The text color can be black. The padding can be 7 pixels. And the border radius can be 30 pixels. I save, I come over. All right, not terrible, but not great. I don't love that it's right on top of everything, right? So what if we add on the messages list some margin on the top of 15 pixels so it's not right on the top? That might not, well, that might help if I spelled margin right. Okay. Don't hate that. Not super pretty, right? I'm sure we could get in and play with additional styling, but think that's pretty clear that that's an incoming message. Yeah, just a second to catch up on that, and then we'll go do our outgoing message. So other than these two files, make sure that your messages list file has an ID of messages list here. Your styling will not apply if you forget this ID. So this ID up at the top, your import for your messages list, and then everything else is on these two files. Go.
I'm having an issue where error in source messages list.js module not found, can't resolve messages list.css.
Is your messages list.css inside the source folder?
It says it's in the source folder. It's right next to the rest of them.
Okay. Try Control-Cing on your terminal and then up enter to restart it. See if you still have that problem.
I still have the problem.
Okay. Share your screen. I do not see a messages list.css. I see a messages.css.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I'm just literally trying to make sure I still have messages right.
Don't get me started. We have thesauruses at work. Thesaurus is the most painful word, and I don't know why. Concierge, I know how to spell it, but where it is on the keyboard, I cannot type that word quick enough. So annoying. And then the other thing you probably need in your messages list.js. Nope, you have your incoming and outgoing. So let's look at your incoming message.
I was trying to resolve everything. I got your code pulled up and I can follow along.
Move that div up to line 2. I'm sorry, line 3. Move that up to line 2 so the return and the div are on the same line.
Is that necessary?
Apparently. Yes, it is necessary.
Okay. Looks terrible. But whatever.
The other way you can get around that is I think if you put a parenthesis on line 2, you can put the div down on line 3 and then a closing parenthesis on 9.
Wow,
I think.
Do I need a semicolon for that?
Yes, that will also work.
Okay.
Okay, I know we're going kind of fast here. Lots of different files. Welcome to working our way up to full stack, right? Lots of different files that we're switching between here. When we get into full stack, we're going to have an entire another window of the back end. But you guys are welcome to pump the brakes at any time here, right? If you're like, nope, I'm lost it. I'm fed up. I'm ready to quit class. We don't want to get you to that level. So feel free to go pause. Feel free to go over that again. Feel free to ask for a repeat of any of the steps. At this point, we should have your message showing up and your background styled with a rounded corner. If anyone does not have that now, ask for help. Terry. And
Yeah, mine's not looking like that.
Okay, share your screen. The reason why it is worth asking for help is because all of you guys should see the debugging process of why doesn't it look like that? because when you guys are working on your own capstone, when you're doing any of that stuff, you think you're doing all the right steps and you're still missing something, right? So I don't want you guys to tune out when someone else is getting help and getting caught up, because this debugging is almost as important as knowing what steps to take or what code to even write in the first place. So I'm going to request remote. It looks like your CSS is right. So we're going to go make sure that this CSS is getting imported in the first place. So I'm going to look at messages list. It is, and we've got no problem there. The other problem that we have is in messages list, we are targeting an ID of messages list. But if we look in messages list, we don't have an ID on this. So this class name is actually supposed to be on the message itself. So we're going to borrow a couple things here. We're going to say ID equals messages list. And then we're going to take this class and apply it onto the incoming message itself. And I think I did that. Let me double check. We did that down here. So you already have that. So I'm going to save that. Now check in your browser. Does that fix your problem?
Yeah.
Good to go. Of
Thanks, Max.
course. Anyone else need help? Okay. Again, this is what it should be looking like. Anyone else? Now that you're seeing the output, rounded corners, background on it. Everyone good? Okay. A lot of the same principles here for the outgoing message, but now we can kind of double dip a little bit. So I'm going to go back to I'm going to actually copy my entire incoming message. So go ahead and copy that. I'm going to head over to my outgoing message, and I'm going to replace that div in there with what I just copied and pasted over. The difference is this is no longer an incoming message. So I'm going to say outgoing message. I'm going to change my word incoming to outgoing. And then what do we want to change in the style of a message like that? Well, we probably want in our outgoing message in the CSS, we want a background color of blue, because I'm an Apple snob and iMessage is far superior. Just kidding. I am going to change my text color to white. And I'm like, okay, it's already looking like an outgoing message, right? We need to make a couple adjustments. I need a little div class call2, and that can be an empty column, but that's just going to offset it, right? So if this ends up being a really long message, it won't go all the way to the edge of the screen. It will have a little bit of breathing room over on the side. I can, in my col10, I think I can do a text end. And that gets my message over on the right. And maybe I want a little bit of breathing room between both of my message types. So I'm going to go to my message text, and I'm going to add margin on the top of 10 pixels and margin on the bottom of 10 pixels. And I think, nope, why didn't that work? Message text, I need it on my whole row. Maybe I'll put that on the row instead. I'm going to do 15. Okay. So my outgoing message, we reused most of my incoming message. I changed my outgoing to my incoming to outgoing. I changed my incoming to outgoing. I put a col2 in so that it's offset a little bit. I put a text end in so the text flew over to the right. And then inside my messages, I targeted the row inside the messages list, added a little bit of space at the top and bottom so the messages wouldn't overlap. And then I added my outgoing message class here to make it look like an outgoing message. Pausing there, trying to leave everything on the screen if I can. I think I can move that there. Going message. Okay, so much everything. And the final result, again, should be the incoming message and the outgoing message on either side. We're trying to make this as responsive as possible, right? So you can shrink your screen all the way down and have it still look pretty good. Because as with most chat apps, you would use them on your phone a lot. The text end goes on this col 10 right here in the outgoing message. That is a little bit of a cheat, so I don't have to like justify content or do anything like that. That comes right from Bootstrap. Everyone good? Anyone need help making it look like this?
I mean, the function is the same, but I don't know why I have so much more uh space. Oh, you know what? It might be because my messages and signatures. Mine's like yours is like very, very close to the border. Mine's like more towards the middle. I think we've got the exact same.
You want to share your
CSS,
screen?
Mhm.
Mine's is kind of the same as Joe's.
Yeah, so if you just like shrink that window all the way down, you'll see it probably looks like mine.
I still got all the space and everything.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I don't. Let me see if I put the same. Just try.
Outgoing message should have a uh call 2 before the call 10.
Oh, up here.
Mm-hmm.
So much control was like a random. Um,
Just a div class name called 2. And then that's an empty div, nothing goes inside of it. There you go. So anyone else whose message bubble is not all the way to the right edge of the screen, I put that little call 2 in as a spacer, and I should have put up messages on my phone. But if you look at messages on your phone, you'll notice that message bubbles don't go all the way to the edge of one screen or the other. Any incoming message is on the left edge, but doesn't go all the way to the right edge. And then any outgoing messages, they don't go all the way to the left edge, they go all the way to the right edge. And so that's how we kind of cheat and use the grid system to get that little spacer or that little gap in there so it doesn't go all the way to the edge. So you're good to go, Joe. Anyone else need help or need a minute? All right, let's get our interface over the finish line, and then we can start getting into the fun part, which is React, right? Of making all this stuff actually work. So I'm gonna we're making good progress. We've got our messages list working. That's got our outgoing message and our incoming message. And we're starting to see component wise how this really can take shape, right? Because what we can do is inside our messages list, we could take our outgoing message and put like 3 of them in. You don't have to follow me on this. I'm just making an example. And now all of a sudden, just like that, we've got multiple messages that are all showing up well without having to do all kinds of for loops and DOM manipulation and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to just leave it with one message type of each. And now I've got to dive into my message input. So before I forget, I'm going to go to my app.js and I'm going to put in my message input down at the bottom. And of course, because VS Code doesn't like me, I need to manually import it. Nothing is going to show up, but I need to make sure that I'm calling that component, telling it where I want that component to go, and telling it how to import it in order to make sure that my input is going to show up when I start working on that file. So I'm going to switch over to my message input.js, and I'm going to use the grid system again for this. But because this is a text input, I'm going to use a form instead of a div. I'm going to throw a class name of row on this so I can use the grid system. I'm going to throw a div class name col10 in place. And inside that col10, I'm going to do an input, which is going to be a type of text. We'll put a class name of form control on it, which is coming from Bootstrap, just makes everything look prettier. I'm going to come outside my col10 and I'm going to do a div in there. This one is going to be a col2 to take up the remaining space. The Bootstrap link, Shaudia, is in index.html. It is right underneath our title tag, still in the index.html. And you can copy it right out of my live share or get it from the Bootstrap website. Either is fine. And if you don't have that in, you'll notice your container's not working. The grid column spacing won't work. All kinds of weird stuff. The buttons won't look styled. So easy one to forget, but once you put it in, everything should just magically click back into place and start working. Okay, and then in my col2, I'm gonna do a button type equals submit. This button type submit, by the way, is really important to make sure the form knows that this button is the submit button that triggers the on submit. So that's why we really need that type submit. We'll do a class name on that of BTN and BTN success. Oop. Helps if I look at what I'm typing, and we will type in the word send in there. And believe it or not, that does all of the styling I need except one pesky little thing. But if I look inside almost all the styling I need, that gives us a good starting point. But where do we expect that input to be? We expect it to be down at the bottom, right? We'll fix that in a second. But for now, everything that we have done so far is in our message input.js. And it should be smushed up against the other messages, and our send button isn't quite big enough. We'll fix that in a second. For now, it should look like this. Apologies if this feels fast or excruciatingly slow, but lots of code we're typing out here. Hopefully a good review again of everything that Bootstrap has to offer and practice getting components built out into small little chunks, seeing how we use those components, and now we're seeing some CSS creep in here. Anyone need another minute? Okay. Because this file is only needing one little CSS tweak, I think it's kind of overkill to create a message input.css for this. The only thing that's really bothering me at this point is this send button isn't big enough. So instead of having to set up an entirely separate CSS file for this, I'm just going to cheat and I'm going to add a style tag in here. Remember, style tags now take curly braces instead of the quotes because we're in React. And all I'm going to do is add a width of 100%. And that's going to make my send button the right size. Inline styles in CSS are really frowned upon, right? Because you already have a giant HTML document. And then inside that giant HTML document, you're now throwing inline styles and it's one long string and it's really hard to read. That's not the case in React. React is like, well, listen, you're already kind of breaking up these files into more manageable components. And because you are using your curly braces here, you can actually make this based off of dynamic JavaScript variables, which is really cool. So while inline styles are discouraged in regular HTML, in React, using that style tag isn't as discouraged as it is in regular HTML. So I just want to throw that out there as you do have options here. There are things like styled components and emotion CSS to other kinds of writing CSS into your React that we don't get into. There is also something called Sass, S-A-S-S, which is like an upgraded version of CSS that allows us to get fancy with some things. Up until this cohort, we were actually teaching Sass in every single cohort. When we got to React, we taught you guys how to install Sass and how to start using it. But just like jQuery going by the wayside, because CSS has improved over the years, because we can nest CSS now, because CSS has variables built into it, we don't really need everything that Sass actually brought to the table. But you may see file extensions .scss or SASS. Those are both using Sass. You will hear about things called styled components and emotion CSS. Again, these are all different ways of writing CSS into React, but we're going to keep it pretty clean here and just use the native CSS because it has gotten so much more powerful. Okay, we got our full width here. What's the last thing we need to do? We need to get the gap right so that the messages bar is down at the bottom. Now you may be tempted to put some margin on the top of this, and that would shove it down to the bottom, right? But then we run into a problem. What happens when another message appears? Well, now my message bar is going to get pushed down even further. That's not what I want. Well, we could use the position tag and make it position fixed, but then I run into another problem. I don't want my messages to accidentally slide under the message bar down at the bottom. And so we're like, all right, what are we really trying to do here? We're really trying to make this center section, the messages list, take up 100% of the screen, but it's not really 100% of the screen because it needs to subtract out the size of the header at the top and the size of our message bar down at the bottom. So here's how we're going to tackle that. We're going to go back over to our messages list.css, and we're going to say the messages list is going to be a height based off of a calculation. The calculation, it's going to be 100 VH, or vertical height. And you notice that kind of fixes the problem, but our messages input is hanging off the screen down here at the bottom. So we have to subtract some pixels. What pixels do we need to subtract? Whatever the height is of this messages with mom, and whatever the height is of our text input down here. I happen to know from previous projects of doing this, that is 130 pixels. Now, if you're like, okay, Max, that's great. I'm glad you know that that's 130 pixels. How would I know that it's 130 pixels? Good question. If we use the inspect tool here, we can actually use this sidebar. So I'm going to click on my header here, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you see that it says that it is 56 pixels high. But it's not just 56 pixels, it's plus 15 pixels plus the 1 pixel for the border. So if we do some math here, 15 plus 56 plus 1 means this header is 72 pixels tall. We can reuse that as well for this bottom bar down here. I'm going to grab the row, and that is telling me it's just 38 pixels. Plus 38 pixels gives me that 110. So why is it 130? Because the messages list has a hiding 15 pixels of margin on top of that up at the top. And then we give it a little bit more on top of that. So we add another 15. That brings us to the 125. And then we just want a little bit of gap between this section and the input. So we get that inspect. We go down to the bottom box model. We start seeing how much space each one of those is taking up. And then what we can do is hover over this and actually see, hey, that height is now getting set based off of how many, based off of the other two elements there. This is not the only way to accomplish this in CSS. There are other ways of doing this. This is the way that makes the most sense to me, right? Of, hey, this center section should grow, but subtract out the size of the height of the top header and the bottom input. Again, multiple other ways of doing that. That's just how I choose to accomplish it in CSS. You could use a position fixed. You could use a position sticky. You could use the bottom property in CSS. Lots of other ways of doing that. But I like to think of it as how big should the middle section be, and then everything else will fall into space around that. Okay, I'm going to pause here. Does anyone have questions? The good news is we are done with rapid fire. Everything should go a little bit slower from here as we ease our way into React concepts. But does anyone have questions so far on what we've done, why we've broken up our CSS, why it's important for something like our messages list.css to have this ID up at the top? Again, that's so it doesn't apply to other components we don't want it to. How are we feeling in general about building an interface in React? Reusable components for the win. We are now set up to get into our data structure. We're now set up to go through the logical steps of getting this input to work, getting the send button to work, all different kinds of fun stuff going on there.
Just to confirm here, this isn't actually like if you were to keep, I mean, we don't have a mechanism to put input and output it yet, but the way that it's calling it in message list, isn't it just going to stack all the incoming before the outgoing?
It depends the order that we call them, right? So we're going to write a map mechanism that checks in the data to see if it's an incoming message or an outgoing message, and then show the appropriate component. So let's just say here you had 2 outgoing messages and then 3 incoming messages. It would look like that.
Oh, we're just gonna push that element every single time. I gotcha.
Correct. Well, we're going to push an object that's going to contain a key of whether it's incoming or outgoing, and then we will map over that array of objects and return out the appropriate component. But that's coming in after break. Okay, let's do attendance before I forget. The keyword tonight is outgoing. Outgoing. Keyword is outgoing. Secret word is outgoing for attendance tonight. And then we will go on break. Believe it or not, I'm going to reward you guys for going a little faster on getting all of this code together. So take a break, be back at 7:20, and we will take it from there.
Max?
Yeah.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So I renamed my file and it's telling me that my outgoing is not defined.
Go ahead and share your screen.
I don't know what is going on. I've tried so many things.
It's fine. Renaming files is always tricky in React. So everything looks fine in outgoing. It's telling us in, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna stop it and reboot it because sometimes it just doesn't like
Oh, okay.
file name changes. Yeah, all you needed to do was reboot it. So you had everything right. Whenever you
Okay.
change file names, just reboot the React server, and that's enough to fix it a lot of the time.
All right. Thank you.
Of course. Morning, resume. So where did we leave off before break? I think in a pretty good spot. We do have our interface all set up. Ooh, how did I lose my... Oh, my CSS is gone. Where did my CSS go? Well, that's odd. What, all I have to do is eat dinner and CSS decides to go on strike? Message list, CSS, messages. Oh, that's weird. My messages list lost its ID. There we go. Now we're back in business. Okay, sorry about that. So I think now we are in pretty good shape with where we left off on our interface, right? So if we think about a chat app, I think we are meeting most of the requirements here, right? We've got incoming messages, we've got outgoing messages, we've got styling for each of them, we've got our form input, we've got a button to send, and we've got our header. And looking back at this, we did this in what, right around an hour, right? So I think that that's pretty good to say, hey, think about where we were at the beginning of the cohort. We wouldn't have even known where to begin with this. And now not only do we know how to build it, we know how to use a library like Bootstrap to bring in those components. We know how now to use React to break it up into components that are easily maintainable. We got all of the custom CSS styling on top of it. And now we're going to dive into the interactivity part of it, right? Okay, I need to be able to type in a form input or a message, hit the send button, and actually have it show up. Terry, go ahead.
The live share also went down too.
Oh, lovely. Thank you for calling that out. I now have the chat open, and I'm going to stop and reshare and post that in there. Sorry about that. Okay, so what is next? Well, again, I like to start from the top down from all of my components. I like to get all of my components out on the screen. And then I like to think about in the order that the user interacts with this, right? What's the user going to try and do first when this page loads? They're going to type in a message and they're going to hit the send button, right? This is how I build my apps day to day at work, right? There are two different approaches, again, to everything. What you can take the approach of I'm going to build out all of my front end. I'm going to make sure that I get sign off on the front end, that all the users like it, and then I'm going to make it interactive. Or some people take the approach of I'm going to build every component and everything that that component needs first. So before I do any other pages in the app, what they may do is say, hey, what do I need to do on my back end? I need a new endpoint, right? I need a new way to send a message. That endpoint needs to be able to save messages into the database. The front end needs to use that endpoint, and then the results of that endpoint need to show up on the page. Obviously, we don't know how to do all of that stuff yet, but it is a different approach to ordering your web development, basically taking I'm going to complete this entire thing first, and then I'm going to move on to the next one. Everyone does that a little differently. We took the approach of let's get all the UI done, let's get everything out on the page, and then let's go make it interactive. So let's do that. Let's make it interactive. Before I do, does anyone have questions? Does anyone's page not look like this? Does anyone need help? Okay, so I am going to hop over to my message input. And I need to know what the people are typing in this form. So I am going to say, hey, in my input, I am going to add a value of inputted message. And I am going to link my inputted message to state by doing const inputted message set inputted message equal to use state. Again, your autocomplete should hopefully help you out there with those empty quotes and the auto import here. And then I'm going to say on change equals grab the event of the on change and set the inputted message to the event target value. And if this works properly, I should still be able to type into my text field, which I am. Okay, so we got that in state. We just changed that from an uncontrolled input to a controlled input, just meaning that React can control that input now through state. Now, what would we like to happen? Well, when they type in ABC and hit enter, it's going to submit the form. We need to do something when that form is submitted. So I'm going to say on submit equals send message. And send message, oops, con send message is going to be a function that console.log out the inputted message just to make sure everything is working. Yeah, Joe, sorry, the live share went down during break, so there is a new link for it that is now in the chat. So we set up our use state. We make a function called send message. We link the send message to our form submission. Then we drop in our value and our on change to make sure that they are tied to state. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and check in my console. I'm going to type in ABC. I'm going to hit the send button, and the entire page refreshes and that input clears out. Anyone remember why that is?
Prevent defaults not on.
Prevent default. whenever I do a form submission, I need to do my event.prevent default to tell the browser stop submitting the form and refreshing the whole page. Just let me control what you're going to do. So I come back over here, I type ABC, I hit send, and I see ABC in my console. Okay, so I can get my inputted message. I'm like, all right, state's working. My form on submit is working. I now have the inputted message that I can access. And what is our goal here? Well, I would like whatever they typed in to show up as an outgoing message. That's going to take us the rest of the class. Here's why. Inputted message is hanging out in message input. We need to find some way to get this message input into We've got some problems though of how do we get that input, whatever they typed in, to show up in an outgoing message. Well, we have to do something called state hoisting. What does state hoisting mean? Well, this is a very common thing. And if you would like to learn more about it, I'm going to put a link to the React documentation. It's called sharing state between components. But we've got a problem here of what needs to happen is that state that is in message input needs to go back up to the app level so that the parent has access to it. It then needs to send down into messages list what the messages are, and then messages list needs to look at what messages have been sent and control what incoming and outgoing messages are actually supposed to show up here. Okay, that's a lot. So let's put message input on hold for now. We're just going to hold that. What we need to do is say, hey, these messages are going to come in from some API, right? They're going to come in as an array of objects, and they're going to have some information about them. Let's mock up what that looks like. So in my app, I don't want to do it down in messages list because I'm going to have that same problem. If I put all of the messages that are accessible in the message list, I'm not going to be able to add a message to it from my message input. So the app, the parent component, is going to be the bridge between both of these. So we're going to come into app and we're going to say const messages, and set messages is equal to a use state. Why does it need to be a use state? Because as that variable gets set, as we update the information in state, we want React to automatically go through and re-render those messages. Then what data type do we want it to start out as? We want it to start out as an array. We have a list of all the messages. Okay, well, we may naively go in and go, oh, a message is just a string. But we need to keep track of two other pieces of information. Was this a sent message or was this a received message? And when was that message sent? So because we need to keep track of the message text, the timestamp, and the type of message, we want to group that all in an object. So we're going to do two messages. We're going to say the text of the message is hello world, first message. We are going to add a timestamp, and we're going to just cheat and make it a new date, which is going to be the current time. Down the road, we'll work on getting the timestamp actually working. And then we are going to show one more piece of information. We are going to say that this is an outgoing message. So we'll say outgoing true. Then we're going to add one more message in here so that we can test it. We are going to say the text is responding to hello out there. Timestamp will be, again, just a new date for now. Just throw the current time in there. And finally, outgoing is going to be false. Just so we can test, we'll add to this, we'll play with this as we go. But for now, we got some data and we've got it in state, meaning it will react to updates to that data. Okay. Now that we've got that in, we're facing the same problem that we had with the message input. How do we access these messages inside the messages list? Well, we are going to use a prop to pass down that information that is in state. Lots of little keywords there. So we're going to add a prop. We'll call the prop messages. And we are going to pass down the messages from up here. Once we get into messages, we got to tell the messages list, hey, you are going to get a prop. So we go into messages list and we tell it, hey, you are going to get some messages. Now we need to map over each one of those messages as an object and say, hey, look at the data inside that object and provide it to a component. So we are going to say messages.map. That gives us access to each individual message. What do we want to show up for each message? We want to return. Actually, no, we don't. We want to check. Sorry, I just killed my server, so it shouldn't switch back to yours. Live share is going to be the death of me tonight, apparently. So sorry, it should be back to your servers now if you refresh localhost 3000. And Joe asked a good question. He said, is it best practice to call your prop the same thing as your variable? I wouldn't say best practice. It's a common practice to do. But oftentimes you'll be working with other variable names, and it will just so happen that the prop name and the variable name don't line up, and that's okay, right? It's kind of like, is it best practice to call the parameter name and the argument variable that you're passing in the same thing? Yes, but it doesn't always line up that way. You may be mapping over data, it may be some different name, and that's okay. So I wouldn't say best practice, but if you can do it, if you are controlling the naming of all the variables, then yeah, it's a good idea to keep them consistent. Okay, from here, we're going to just console log out our messages. So I'm just going to console log message for now. I'm going to take a look in my console, and we should see the two objects that we created. I'll pause there, give you guys a second to catch up. App.js, we created this use state with some placeholder or dummy data messages just to get it started. We took those messages and we passed it down into a prop. We updated our prop up here so the component knows that prop is getting sent in. We map over them, which is just a special type of loop to get access to each individual message. Then we console log out the message to make sure that we can see the messages in the message list. And this is what we should be seeing in our output. Everyone good? Anyone need another minute?
I need another minute trying to find
You
out
got
why
it.
mine was closed.
Let me do that trickle down one more time, just as a review. We did our set state up here. We loaded up 2 dummy messages or placeholder messages just so we have something to test with. We added in our messages here, which is coming as a state, and we pass that into a prop called the same thing messages. Then in our messages list file, we updated our first parameter of the component to extract out the messages prop. We use the messages prop, which is trickling down from the state of app.js to loop over each one of them. That gives us access to each individual message, and then we console logged that message out.
That's why I got both since calling twice. I got hello, then responding, then hello, then responding.
It is normal in the dev environment to get 2 outputs. Unfortunately, it's just a side effect of how the hot reload server works. So if you have it twice, that is, or if you have duplicates in the console, that's okay.
Yeah, I got a error message. .map is not a function.
It's a liar. Go at Share Street. Okay. You are missing your curly braces around messages in line 5. Yep, right in there. Between the parenthesis and the M, you need an opening curly. And yep.
Yeah, now I got another error though.
All right. Hit me with it.
Uh, cannot read properties of undefined read and map.
Interesting. Let me see your app.js. Got your messages, your set messages. Let's go down to the messages list. And there you are on line 23. You're missing your prop to send messages in to the messages list component.
23. It's right here.
Yeah, so look at my 23. You see how in that file, you see how I have the messages equals messages.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And save, and I think that should do it for you.
Yeah, it does. But I gotta wonder, is like you provided a value prop to a form without an on-change handler? Is that normal?
Let me see that. I don't have that error. You prop without an on-change handler. Okay. Switch me back over to your code, please.
Mhm.
And we can fix that in your message input. Oh, there it is. Lower half. Send message. We have our value here. We also need to do an on change. That takes the event and sets the inputted message to the event target. Oh. Copilot, why you screw with me? There we go. That should fix it.
Thanks, Max.
Of course. Anyone else need another minute or need help? Okay. So now we get to tie it all together.
Max. Max.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, your chat.
Oh, yep. Thank you. That time I had it open, but again, Zoom does not let me play a sound effect when a new chat message comes in. Drives me apeshit.
I looked back over at my console. You said duplicates is okay. How many duplicates is an okay amount of duplicates?
Refresh the page and see how many you get.
All right, I got 4 right now. I looked up, like
That's
I
fine.
had 4 initially, and then I looked over, and there's like 20 of them in there.
Every time you save the file, it will re-trigger 4 to come out. And so
Okay.
that's okay.
Well, while we have time, I do have a question. So what we need to like do this when we so like for example, like when my capstone has like multiple pages, this is like the setup what we need to do for it to have like set of multiple pages.
So
Or
pages we're going to handle with something called React Router, which we will be learning in next week's project. So when we get into the blog project, we'll talk about that. We'll be kind of using half of these concepts with that, and the other half we won't. So what we'll be doing, if you think back to the blog project that we did before React, right? We did that cool thing where we were able to use the timestamp in the URL to pull up the specific page that we cared about, right? So when we hit the read more button on the home page, the page that showed the entire post knew exactly what post it was supposed to show. React routers kind of makes that even easier to do. And so that's what we'll be doing, is setting up the router so that there are multiple pages, but then also being able to dynamically pull in that route information. So the blog project is really the cockroach of all of our projects. It is the thing that you absolutely cannot kill, because we do it in vanilla JavaScript first, then we do it in React without the database, then we go back and do it with React with the database, and then we add authentication to it. So we add in several layers of that blog project, and that really should cover a lot. We will also come back to this project and layer in our own API that we build around it so that we can actually save messages and send them amongst each other.
and for like the comment section, because I have like the comment section for my capstone. Can I do it kind of similar to this, or do I need to do a little differently?
Absolutely. This and the blog project are the two projects I would say students refer to the most when working on their capstones. So absolutely feel to use this as a reference while you're working on your capstone. Totally, totally fine. Okay, does anyone need another minute or need help? They don't have their console output showing. And this time I am actually watching the chat. Everyone good? Again, this is what your output should be looking like. I don't know what that object is from, but you should be able to see the two showing there. And again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with asking for help here, because we are now seeing all of the effects of, I like to think of it as pachinko, right? The game where you drop the ball or the coin at the top and it just bounces down all of the pegs until it reaches the bottom. We are shooting for a very tiny little target at the bottom, and there are a lot of different places our code can go wrong or that ball can get stuck, right? And so this is all about being able to trace all the way through. I am going to try and stop at 8:15 tonight, just so we can review the flow of this code so far and make sure that we are understanding it. Okay. We got all of our messages here. We're passing it down as a prop. We are opening up messages list. We're getting the messages as that prop. We are looping over everything, and we're logging out the message itself. That message, though, is an object. So we need to do some work to make sure that the that object is actually showing what we want as the proper component. So here, I'm going to take out my console log, or I'll leave it in for now. I'm going to say if the message is outgoing. How am I able to just use .outgoing? Because that is a property of the object that we set up representing the message. And we're going to say if it's an outgoing message, then return an outgoing message here. Else, return an incoming message. Now I can delete my incoming and outgoing messages here. Okay, come over here, outgoing message, incoming message. And I'm like, well, I said, hello, first message, responding to hello out there, and I ain't seeing that. What do we need to do to pass in the information so that this is actually showing our message text?
Say that again.
What do we need to do, right? This text doesn't line up with what I have here. So what do we need to do to make this text show up in our actual components?
We
Use effect.
Not quite. Use effect we would use if we had to like make an API call to get that information. But we already have that data hanging out. How did we pass the information from the app level to the messages list level?
With a prop.
With a prop, right? We took these messages here and sent them into the messages list with a prop. We need to do that again at the messages list level. We have access to the message. We need to provide access to that message in the outgoing and incoming messages. So I'm going to show you two different ways that we can do this. Both accomplish the exact same thing. In our outgoing message, we can pass the prop called text. That is going to come from our message.text. Then we're going to pop open our outgoing message. And we're going to do something different this time. Instead of putting in our curly brace here and putting in text, we can add in the word props. Then we can access that text using our props.text down here. This is an alternative way of working with props. Both are completely acceptable. One is not preferred over the other. So you can see here, we access the props by putting curly braces in and the name of the prop. Here, we didn't put the curly braces in, we just called it props, and then we accessed the details of those props like any other object. Now, you can see we have hello world first message. But what we don't have is this is an example of an incoming message. Well, we have that. That's not what we put in our placeholder. So we have to fix that in messages list. This time we're going to do it another way. I'm going to pass in the individual message, and instead of passing in just the text, I'm going to pass in the whole message object. We can then open up our incoming message and access that message here. And then we can say message.text here and get access to the responding to hello out there. So two things, two different ways of using props. Here, I extracted out just the text from the message and passed it in to a prop called text. I then got access to props without the curly braces and then was able to access the text from the props. The other way of doing it is I can pass the entire message in, which I access the message here with the curly braces, and then I'm able to use the text here. If you got your props lined up properly in all three places, both in the messages list, in the outgoing message, again, pay attention to with or without curly braces up here and here, and then same in incoming message, your props here, and using the prop here, you should see the text showing in both messages from the text that we entered in app.js. Two different ways of using props. Take a moment, make sure you understand both. Start a poll just to see where you guys are at, and then we're going to take a break here and we're going to review everything that we're doing so far. Again, the end result that we're going for here is that your message text from your app.js is showing up both in the outgoing message and in the incoming message.
That's it, just getting the text boxes to match what we set the yeah, right there for messages.
So what's your question?
Just making sure I got the end result right.
Yeah, the end result is the two texts that we put in here show up as the right message types in here. Before we go through an explanation of all of this, I want to make sure that we get everyone caught up as much as possible, right? Because we're working on this again on Monday. So if you need any help, now is the time. Or if you just need a couple more minutes, that's fine. Don't vote in the poll quite yet. Want to make sure we give everyone a minute to breathe here, and then we'll go through and do the explanation of all of this.
Max, mine is working, but I still have an error.
Okay. Is your error each child in the list should have a unique key prop?
Yep.
I have that as well. So the good news is it's not you. Or if it is you, it's all of us. I don't know which is worse. All right, most of you guys have voted in. We'll give you one more minute and then we will review all of this.
It's the gray text is the outgoing message, right? Or is
Yes.
that? Yeah, mine's ain't
Oh,
working.
no, sorry. The blue text is outgoing. Gray text is incoming.
Income is not working. Let me try to debug it before I, ask for your help.
So check I got tricky a little bit with the props here. Make sure you've got curly braces in the incoming, but you don't have curly braces in the outgoing. While you're doing that, I am going to try and set up my screen so that we can see as much as this code as possible. Find it, Terry, or you need a little help before we do a review?
Yeah, I think I might need help because now I get another error. Can I read properties of undefined?
Okay, go ahead and share screen. Quest remote. Your app.js has your messages. They are objects. They are set properly. We're sending them into messages list. Messages list is getting your messages and messaging messages.mapping, looping over them. If it's an outgoing message, grab the text from it, pass that in as a prop. If it's an incoming message, pass the whole giant object down. So let's go outgoing message first. You're using your props and showing the text, and that lines up with the text that you're passing, so that's not a problem. Then on the incoming message, you're passing down the entire message. So we get access to the message here and we show the text here. So I don't see a problem there. So let me see, can you drag your browser over to this window and I can see what the error is? And give me a refresh. Okay, so it's saying not only is it undefined reading text, but it's on incoming message 5. So that helps us narrow it down. Incoming message 5 is expecting the message, and then it's trying to read the text. It's getting that message from our messages list, which is passing down the message here as a prop, and you are accessing it right here. So I think our problem isn't here. I think the problem is all the way up in our app.js when we pass down the messages. Son of a gun. No, it's not. All right, let's clear this, refresh. Text. Object doesn't bother me. Cannot read properties of text on 5. Incoming message. Is it just something like, is like message spelled wrong in your messages list? Message, message. Message is coming from message. Okay, what happens if we just comment this out and return just an empty div as a sec for a second? Okay, something is definitely wrong here because even when I don't use the incoming message, it's still calling it. So whenever we get something funky going on like this, and this is a good warning for everyone when you're like, I swear everything is right, I just don't understand why it's not working, try and reboot your server. Seriously? Undefined text. I'm gonna have to messages. Return messages list. If we, oh, you know what? It's these pesky ones. We deleted these because now we're using the ones that have the text and the message in them. So if we take those out, now you're up and running.
Oh, okay.
So the problem was that you had those old placeholder ones in there that weren't passing in the text, so they didn't know how to show that.
Gotcha.
Almost had me stumped there. That was a good one. I was almost ready to throw in the towel. All right, anyone else need help before we do a review here? Okay. So I know you guys have said numbering out these steps are more helpful than the visual, but I think that this is a case where when you can see how everything connects through, it becomes a lot easier. So I want you guys, I wish I had like a game show buzzer where you could like just smack a button and buzz in and be like, I need another explanation of that. So use your raise hand button in Zoom, throw a question in chat. Feel free to stop me at any point here, right? This review does me no good. This review is for you guys. So jump in on questions or just say pause there. Brain's got to process that in CPU before it can get to memory. It's totally fine. Okay, we start in our app.js. Our app.js has all of these messages. They happen to be in state. State, again, is what we call the memory of a component. It is something special that says whenever you set a new value in here, React will automatically update your page to show that information. We are representing them as an array. So this array is a list of messages. Each message is represented by an object. That object has three keys, the text, the text, the timestamp, and the outgoing. We use the parameter of useState here to set this entire array into messages as our first value. Problem is these messages are up in app. They don't do us any good all the way up there. We need to find some way to get these messages into our messages list. So we take these messages and we send them into the message list using a prop called messages. Those messages now get sent into the messages over here. We take those messages and we now map over them. What does a map do? A map is just a special type of for loop that returns a new item, right? So if I said, hey, here's this thing, map it to this other thing, you would be like, oh, well, this looks like this over here. This looks like this over here. That's what map is doing. Map is just a special loop that's saying, hey, go take each one of these objects over here and map it to one of these components over here. So each object that we see here is actually getting sent in to the message right here. Joe.
I believe it is this way, but so since you can pull from I guess the parent function, you can't like name other variables the same thing as if they're in like if you declared a new variable messages within message list, that would conflict with what you're pulling from
The
an
prop
app, right?
that's getting passed in. Correct.
Right, okay.
Yes. Okay, but you can't just access a variable you declared in app in messages list unless you send it in as a prop. Cool. Okay, so now every time that we get a message, we have two different messages, right? We've got message 1 and we've got this entire other thing as message 2. So why are we seeing two messages? Because we have two objects here. The goal of this map is to map the data, the object itself, into a component. So the first time this map runs, it's looking at 1 over here. This message and this message here and this console log message are all related to this object over here. This first time that the loop runs, it says, go check to see if this message is outgoing. So it goes over here and it goes, hey, this message is outgoing. Outgoing is true. So we are going to avoid the else statement here and we're going to go look in outgoing message. So outgoing message is linking me to this file down here. What we do is we take that message and we get the text. That message text, hello world, first message is coming into the text right here. We then take that text here and send it into the props. The props then access the text. This text lines up with this text, which eventually connects us back into the hello world first message. And we eventually see the text show up down in this component. Now the screen's getting ridiculous, so I'm going to clear everything. We do that all over again. The second time this runs, we still take all the messages, we still send them into the prop, into the messages list. The messages still comes in as a prop. We are still already mapping over them. We go get this message. Now we get this object over here. This object sends into the message and it goes, hey, is the message outgoing? This time the message is not outgoing. So we jump down to this else statement. The else statement says, go get the incoming message. Now we go down to here. This time, instead of sending in just the message text, we send in this whole message. So the message comes down here. This message lines up with this message right here. Now we go, okay, what do we want to show? We want to show the message text. That message text comes all the way through the message text right here. So what's the ultimate trickle down of all of this? Messages goes into messages, which goes into messages, which goes into messages list. Messages list gets the messages, maps over, loops over them to get each individual message. Each individual message is broken up by whether it is outgoing or not. If it is outgoing, it sends to outgoing message, including the message text, which is coming from the message here. We then use the props to extract out the text. Or it is an incoming message. So we go to the incoming message here. We take the entire message, which is coming from the same spot in the map. We take this message and link it to the prop. We then take that prop and link it into the message, and we extract out the text, which is again coming all the way from right here.
It seemed like using like the outgoing prop seems a bit more simpler than the putting like the squiggly line on like the incoming message box. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm right or not, but
And some people like one and some people like the other, right? So it's really, really important to understand that you can do it either way, right? And then there is a kind of a third variation that you could do where you could send in again, don't follow me, just proving a point. Instead of sending in the text here, you could send in the whole message. And then down here, you could say props.message.text, and that would also work. I think. I mean, I know it would, but I want to make sure that it's, and yeah, that still does the same exact thing. So two different ways of doing it. I'm actually going to leave it like this because that might be a little bit more clear of the two variations of how you can use a prop. But two different ways of doing it, both are totally fine. So I will say, let's go ahead, everyone update their code, both to be message, but this shows you the two different ways of receiving and accessing a prop from there. Joe, you had a question, and then I'll get to the next question in chat.
Yeah. I don't know if this is just me, but sometimes I feel like it's a little convoluted where even though it might be the best practice to keep everything the same name, for me to keep track of what is being declared and what is being pulled from as far as variable names, it just gets a little murky as
Yes.
we're using it so many times.
So let me try and address that. I'm not going to leave it like this because I think that it consistency is good in coding, but just as an exercise to see how this data is trickling down, let me do it like this. Messages in state, messages in state, messages to list, messages to list, individual message, message to single, message to single, message to single. I don't know that that's exactly what you named it, Joe, but this accomplishes, no, it doesn't. Line 9. Line 9 on messages list.
Oh, you got just constant log message, I think.
Oh, thank you. And then this needs individual message. And that does the same thing.
Yeah, much easier to understand. I know it's best practice to keep things consistent for variable naming. Just easier to learn while reading it this way.
All right. Would you let's take a vote. Does this make more sense to you guys, or would you want to leave it as we had it?
I would say this makes more sense.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in? Okay, so let's do
Oh,
that as
wait.
our last
Yeah.
edit to code tonight. So I'm gonna can I highlight? I'm gonna draw on my screen everything that we changed. So this is messages in state, messages in state, messages to list, messages to list, messages to list, individual message, message to single, message to single. This says individual message, but I can't fit it all on my screen. Then this becomes messages to single, messages, message to single, and message to single. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 different changes to those different variable names. And I promise that is the last edit for tonight. So I'm going to stick around for at least a couple minutes. No, a good marination is important for meat before you cook it. Same goes apparently for your brain. So try and take the last couple brain cells that you've got left to rub together tonight, read through this code, see if you have any questions. And then we will start by numbering all of this code out on Monday, because I'm out tomorrow. Nathan will be in. On Monday, we'll number through all of this code and make sure that we've got the level of understanding before we make our sending our messages work and our edit and all of that fun stuff.
You got an extra I in individual.
Oh, well, I like to be an individual. Yep. And the good news is, because you don't see me again until Monday, again, not canceling class tomorrow, Nathan is in, you do get to have a chance over the weekend to read through this code. It will also be up on GitHub and generate any questions for Monday's class. Why is that important? Because the next project we do, the blog project, is even more complicated than this one. And we've got an entire another day to spend on this chat project. So if you are feeling trepidated now, is that an agitated? Whatever. If you are feeling like you're lost now, that's not the problem. The problem is not feeling lost. The problem is finding where you are lost. And so if you can come in with questions of where you are lost, you may find that you are right next to the finish line, very close to that light switch of flipping it and having the light bulb turn on. And you might just need that little extra push here, right? Passing props is complicated. We're starting with data all the way in app. We're going down to messages. We're trickling it down to outgoing and incoming message. This is the nature of having files spread out. Those individual components make our code more reusable, but it also makes it more complex to be able to pass that information around. And so it is very important that we get practice with that and we understand that. So again, not a problem. It is not concerning if you aren't getting this. What is concerning is if you don't know where you're getting it. So if you have those questions, now is totally fine to throw them out. If you want to build them up, that is also totally fine. You can submit those questions anonymously in the 30-second feedback form, and I can answer them on Monday. Or after we comment out the code on Monday, we'll go through your questions and make sure that everyone is on a very solid foundation here before we move on to adding even more on top of this.
Wait, so message and state is are we passing it inside of message list?
Yeah, so we're taking it from messages in state and we're passing it to messages list in messages to list. So now messages to list over here equals this right here. So if you did a console log messages to list, it would be the exact same thing as a console log to messages in state in app.js.
Yeah, I definitely like this setup way better because I'm able to understand it.
I think I upset React.
What'd you do?
Well, I got irritated that it kept throwing me warnings in the terminal, so I just cleared the whole terminal and then the whole thing crashed. And now I can't
Just
get it to start back
Control
up.
Control C to stop it, and then
I
up
did,
enter to
and then
restart.
it still won't go. I'll just show you what I'm doing here real quick. I even
Yeah.
tried manually killing all the terminals. So we'll just try it. We'll go back in here, open the thing.
If your brain is officially fried and there is no more to extract out of this code, you are welcome to head out. But please, please, please bring questions to class on Monday. We want to have you all on a solid level of understanding of this before we move on.
Did you check your chat, Max?
Oh. For future reference, how would we handle state updates, especially if our project grows and state becomes more complex? Also, anyone know a keyboard shortcut for creating a file in VS Code? Should just be Command N for a new file. The problem is then you have to determine where you're going to save it. And at that point, you might as well just go over and right click and create it at the right spot. Just personal opinion, I know plenty of people who use the Command N, but as the project grows, it's easier to find the file location and then create it there. As for state updates, the general idea here is there are some more advanced state management solutions. One of them is called Redux, Rudux. I absolutely hate it. I cannot stand Redux. I have to write a ton of boilerplate code to make any of it work. They overcomplicate things with reducers. Just personally not a fan of it. My personal approach to more advanced state management is keep everything as local as you can, right? So oftentimes you don't need global state. You really only need to know what they've typed in at a low component level, right? So ideally you use state as locally as possible and don't need to pass it up several levels in the hierarchy. When you do need to do that, and there are some legitimate use cases for that, React has come out with something in the past 2 or 3 years called the Context API. And the Context API basically allows you to get access to scope or access to state at any scope. So as long as you're within what they call the provider, you're able to access global information like, hey, what user is signed into the app? It doesn't matter how many child level deep I am with components. I always should be able to access what user is signed in. And so it's called the React Context API, and that integrates in with state. That's how you do like global level state. But then again, my answer, unless it truly needs to be in global state, is try and manage state as at a low level as possible. I think I spelled individual right now this time. Yeah, I kind of agree that it is easier to follow, but I also hate it because it's not consistent. But it's one of those things that like we'll try it like this for now and see how it goes. Here, you want to share your screen or did you figure it out?
Am I not sharing my screen? It looks like I'm sharing my screen.
I don't see your screen.
Oh, it says I'm sharing my screen. Hold on.
Yeah, I mean, I saw it.
Oh, now I can see it. Okay.
Okay.
Just npm run start or npm start.
I was doing that. I was
The
gonna
fuck
delete
did
node
you
modules
do?
and I don't know.
Are you, oh, no. Is it, it shouldn't be, but is it because you're in the src folder?
Yeah, I really upset React. I really don't know what I did. All I did
Well,
was clear the terminal.
your gut of doing this was the right answer, but I wouldn't recommend any other beginner doing that without supervision.
What, removing and reinstalling node?
Yeah, node modules.
Right.
Removing and reinstalling node is a entirely separate, much bigger issue.
Wait. Yeah, I'm really not sure what I did there. I cleared it,
And
tried to restart it, and then it was like, nope.
and you don't have
Maybe
any, no?
maybe it's Visual Studio. I don't. There are so many dependencies in the field of JavaScript. The JavaScript developers funny things about this, I guess.
Come on.
But no.
Is it what? Is it just Joe, you broke your computer.
It's there.
Why is it not finishing though?
I really did it this time, huh? Maybe I just need to close Visual Studio and try again.
I
What if
like
we
that
do it from
idea.
what if we do it from the terminal without being in Visual Studio and just
Well, they really are supposed to use the same terminal. I don't think there's a major difference. Can you reopen it and oh, thank you. I don't know if I was just waiting on that or not. Do it down here.
I'm actually amazed that you managed to nuke React.
yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think it was actually React or Node or anything. I think VS Code is having a problem. Yeah.
No, I think the problem was in React scripts, which is like the thing that starts the dev server up. But it wasn't doing this before, so I think you're fixed.
Right.
Is it? Did you have a white screen before?
No. Where did you start it in the main? Does it need to start? No, because you're doing it in the code folder for index.
Oh, your index.js is empty. Do you have my live share open?
Yeah, well, I did the.
Just copy and paste my index.js in.
Oops.
That would explain why React scripts wouldn't start. And is your index.html also empty? Sure is.
Deleted. See, because we deleted Node. I didn't even touch those files.
No idea. I have no idea how you would do that.
Well, we're gonna need more and more things. Every am I gonna crash again from using sidecar? Yeah, wait, is this what we're doing tonight?
I do have to run.
Yeah, no, you're good. I know. I think I know what's going on here now. As long as it's able to communicate with localhost, I can figure the rest out.
Yeah, once that pastes in, and I don't know why it's taking so long, but I think that will fix it for you. All right, I do have to run, so have a great night. Write down any questions you guys have, and we will start there on Monday.
Alrighty.